Hello, everyone. It's time once again for Catalog and Cocktails. It's your honest, no BS, non salesy conversation about enterprise data management with tasty beverages in hand. I'm Tim Gasper, longtime data nerd and product guy at Data.World, joined by Juan Cicada. Hey, Juan.
It's Tim, it is always a pleasure to take a break and let's go chat about data. And today we're going to go back to like the core of what we do this podcast, which is cataloging cocktails. So data catalogs. One of the key things is governance around that, which is the key episode here. But I'm super excited to have Winfried Etzel, who's a data governance enthusiast. He's the podcast host of Metadama, the Dama for Norway, and it's just somebody who I've always seen on LinkedIn, and we interact and we comment, but we just never had the chance to sit down and chat with him. And also, which I love, it is when a guest calls out somebody else we should invite, and that was Ole who suggested Winfried. How are you doing?
Great. Hey, thanks for the invitation.
Well, we're super excited to have you. Thanks for accepting. Well, let's kick it off as always. What are we drinking and what are we toasting for?
Yeah, Winfried, you actually have a real cocktail going on here.
I do, yeah. And I think that's probably a COVID thing. But we started in 2020, my wife and me, to do a cocktail Tuesdays. Went a bit overboard on that one. So now it's like once a month. But I'm having a Rome with a View, it's called. It's a Campari-based cocktail, a bit lighter, bit summery, which is kind of nice now in the middle of winter. So yeah, Campari, vermouth, lime juice, and a bit of club soda.
Oh, that sounds good.
That does sound fantastic.
I feel like I should have done that. Last night I had a Campari and soda. So if I want like a low proof drink, often I'll have like a Campari and soda. But this seems like a better version of that.
Yeah. Well, we are the honest no BS. We are pre-recording this episode, so it is very early, and I'm having coffee right now. It's just coffee. There's no Bailey's or anything here. But now, you know what? If people have been listening for a while, I was doing all I had all this. Oh my God, I'm blanking. Aperol. I had a bunch of Aperol in my house, and I was just doing a bunch of just cocktails with it. I need to do the same thing with Campari now. I'm going to do that. I'm going to get a bottle of Campari, just come up and just do a bunch of cocktails based on Campari. So that's a great idea. How about you, Tim?
Well, you heard I was having a Campari and soda yesterday, although it sounds like I should try some new things. Since it's too early here. I know it's kind of early for you too, Juan. I'm just drinking some coffee right now, but I'll just tell you something that I want to do, some intentionality here, right? I've noticed that there's a lot of these different, like not Campari, but Aperol, but these different like aperitifs and a lot of cocktails. You can do interesting things there. So that's going to be my goal is I want to start doing, more interesting kind of alternatives to Campari and Aperol. That's one of my goals this year.
All right. Well, we let's start seeing. We've got to keep ourselves honest, and let's see what's going to happen in the next few episodes and how much we're going to be sharing. All right, let's get our warm-up question. So today we'll be talking about data governance, how we rethink data governance. What are other things in our lives, in our day-to-day, whatever, that you think that we just need to rethink on how we do that? Putting you on the spot, Winfried. What do you, anything?
Yeah. There's something we are rethinking right now, and that is, when do you start your summer vacation planning? And my wife started, 1st of January, and I'm still kind of adjusting to new year 2025. Summer is far out. I'm not ready for that yet. But yeah, I think maybe I should rethink that. Maybe I should start a bit earlier as well.
Oh, I'm here with your wife. Like we actually started planning 2025 travel like last year. We know every places we need to go till next December, like for the entire 12 months. We just had to do it. It's like and I on my personal travel too. So that's a good one. I think we need to rethink and plan. And the other thing is, I think gives you kind of very intentionally. It's like, oh, you plan it early on. What do you want to do? Where you want to go? Maybe even who you want to go with, and because you need to give also kind of heads up. So I like that. Yeah. Tim, what about you?
I'm gonna throw out there. We were at Data Day Texas this last weekend in terms of when we're recording this episode, and one of the discussions that we had in one of the breakout groups was around how with AI, right, people are gonna have to be very adaptable. We're gonna have to be really working on like learning and keeping up and keeping our skills up and retooling. And my thought is we got to rethink how education happens while you're trying to work at the same time. I feel like it's very hard to do those two things at the same time. So I know that's very high level, but I'm just throwing it out there. And for those listening, maybe you've got some ideas or you see some people or some places doing it well. But how could we integrate education and work more together so it's not like a pain to try to do both at the same time?
That's a good one. All right. Well, let's kick it off. We so much to talk about. Winfried, honest, no BS. Why do we need to rethink data governance right now?
I think we are at a point of time where we have the means to do data governance differently than we have done before. We have AI, we have automation, we have possibilities, and I feel like that's what we're focusing on right now. How can we use technology to make data governance more tangible, more actionable? But that also gives us the possibility to rethink data governance as a whole. Maybe it needs to mature into something that remains objective, ensures accountability on the one side, but also is kind of adaptable to all the changes that are happening.
All right, so let's start digging into these things. So you bring up two aspects. One is with I guess before doing the data governance before was very manual. I think right now we're in this era where we can really automate it more. So how much are you seeing that it is it really today automated enough? And or is there's like we're just barely scratching the surface and there is so much more that we just haven't even thought about it. So let's start on that side.
Yeah, I think on that side there is still a lot to explore. But I think we got a lot of great people, great companies working on that side. Yet the other side is still kind of unexplored. So I've been trying to look into data governance from a like timeline perspective, right? And I see like three main bulks or events that shaped how we do data governance today. One is that early on compliance focus, right? Emphasis on meeting regulatory requirements. How do we implement them into data? Second is that push to kind of enablement, right? Where you switch to how can we use governance to create business value? And now we are in a third kind of section that I call it automation motor, right? So now data governance can become a driver for automation in complex, even distributed landscapes, can help us to align on standards, policies in the organization through automation. And that's a different landscape than what we had before.
That's a unique opportunity. And you didn't use the word AI, but obviously, that's one way that automation can be done. I feel like, at Data World, we work with a lot of customers that are trying to do governance. And I'll be super honest and no BS, right? A lot of governance for most companies still is very manual, right? Despite the fact that technology can be there to help. Um, what are we missing? Like, are there? It's not. You kind of mentioned some pieces that are explored and vendors are working on. You mentioned some pieces that are unexplored. Like, maybe let's dive into those two pieces a little bit. Like, what do you think are the known opportunities that we just need to flesh out versus what are the ones that are unknown that you feel like we need to lean into and we need to explore?
I think in general, when you look at what is it that we automate in data governance, it's the enforcement part, it's the operationalizing of policies. It's not a replacement of that oversight function that we have in governance, right? It's not a replacement of how do we hold the organization accountable for the actions? How do we ensure that our actions are directed in a sense? And that's the part that's still, I feel, unexplored. Maybe it's a bit too business, maybe it's a bit too high level, too strategic. But that's the part I think that's what data governance is going to mature into. in the future, once we are able to really automate that other part, that enforcement part.
I know when I talk to a lot of governance folks, they tend to be skeptical and very nervous about automation. They like there's some initial excitement about like, oh, we could automate classification, we could also automate policy, we could automate, but then when brass comes to tax, then they say, well, I would want to review everything. I would want everything to come to my desk so I can review it, and and then it's like, oh, well then, is that okay? Is that a good automated step, or do you think we need to get to a world where it's more automated than that?
I think we will eventually get to a world where it's more automated than that. But I think it's a necessary step to a certain degree. And this comes back to that human oversight way of thinking, right? I've proposed a new definition for data governance. And I think before we can talk about that, we have to talk a bit about the traditional part of the definitions. And every time I talk about data governance definitions, there's like a whole bunch that come up, right? And this is a weird thing, right?
100.
Yeah.
What's your take on it? Like, what's the traditional definition versus, where do you think it needs to go?
Oh, what's the traditional one? I think that the most common one or most known one is the DEMA one. Obviously because I'm DEMA Norway.
I've got my DEMA book over here.
I got it right behind me there.
The Bible. Right?
And DEMA says it's the exercise of authority, control, and shared decision making. And by shared decision making, they think of planning, monitoring, and enforcement over the management of data assets. And from that definition, there are certain parts where you naturally see a tendency to automation, right? Enforcement, talked about that. Monitoring is another one. But on the planning side, I don't think that's the part that should be automated. And so my alternative perspective is that data governance is a human-based system by which data assets in a socio-technical system, and this is an important part, the socio-technical part, by which these assets are directed, overseen, and by which organizations are held accountable for achieving their defined goals. So it's a mouthful, I know.
Directed, overseen, and what was the last part?
And by which organizations are held accountable for achieving their defined purpose.
Got it.
And there's a reason why it's that complex and built that way. And I took the starting point in how do we define corporate governance? And this is actually a definition that is really closely aligned to the corporate governance definition. And this is something I've been thinking about for years. Why do we do data governance differently from corporate governance? Why do we do data governance differently from IT governance? What makes it so different? And it should be aligned. So that's why I chose corporate governance as a basis. Then I'm having that human-based system in there, right? That we talked about. There has to be some kind of human oversight, especially when you automate with AI. Then we talked about the socio-technical system. And for me, it's a four-way, right? A socio-technical system has four different interactions. It's a machine-machine interaction, a machine-human interaction, a human-machine interaction, and a human-human interaction. They all are part of a socio-technical system. And at the end of the day, I think we had this discussion before a lot of times, that how can a machine be accountable for its own actions? So if data governance wouldn't be human-based, then we would have machines accountable for their actions. But we would also have machines accountable for human actions, which is kind of weird to think of.
Yeah, that is interesting. I don't know, what's your perspective? Is the human always ultimately accountable? And maybe that connects a little bit to the fear I mentioned and why the human wants to check everything.
I think it is, yeah. The question is, who's the human in that picture, right?
Well, what I see, so I'm looking at your definition. The data governance is a human-based system by which data assets in a social technical system are directed. And I like how you were being explicit in the social technical. It's a machine, the human, all the combinations here. But if it's really a human-based system, then should the machine to machine actually be part of that? Is not part of it, or it's really a machine human based system. And I know I'm kind of picking out the words here and being pedantic, but the point is thinking now about like if we're redefining data governance and thinking about automations and thinking about AI and agents and all that stuff, we will be seeing more of these machine talking about it. And so will they actually be making decisions completely autonomously, or is this going to be an area where it will never be fully autonomous, because a human will always want to have some oversight, and it's a trust. And then also I wonder how much of that is actually cultural or geopolitical. It's like, yeah, the Europeans will always want to have a human. The Americans will like, just go keep going, right? Or even depending on the domain and stuff. I don't know.
I think there are a couple discussion points here that we can pick up from. One is, where's the line between data governance and data management? Which is an interesting one. For me, it is once you enforce decisions, you are on the management part, right? You're not governing anymore, you're managing. And the other one is that there are three elements in that definition that we haven't talked about yet that kind of frame what data governance then is. And that's the directing, the overseeing, held accountable, and defined purpose, right? And I've called them the data negotiator, the data director, and the data auditor. And they're not roles, right? They're more thought of as principles. But the negotiator is kind of, data governance has a role to translate business requirements on the one side, regulatory requirements on the other side, external pressure, internal pressure, and kind of prioritize and negotiate between those to build data requirements or data policies. That's the data negotiator for me. The data director is data governance as someone that shapes the focus, right? Shapes the vision of data. And the auditor, I think that's the most obvious one, because we have had that one for years. That's the oversight and accountability part.
I like how you're separating these things, and I think as we go back to like when we're talking about how things have evolved, right? Governance has always been very like compliance part, which is associated to the auditor, and I think now our analogy always that we bring up, like brakes in a car, governance is to slow you down, but also to enable you to drive faster. So I think the auditor kind of role that way is kind of the brakes to slow you down. The negotiator can be seen as the one that enables the enablement to drive you fast, let you drive fast safely. But the director is kind of like, all right, what is this? How we're going to balance these two things together? Is it a 50-50? Is it an 80-20? Is it right? How is this going to evolve? How is this going to change over time? Or is it? That's a very interesting way of thinking about this. And I feel that today, I mean, it also depends on industries, right? It's very much focused on the auditor part, less focused on the negotiator, because folks are kind of either been brought up and educated, and their culture has been in that auditor part, and they've been disconnected to the business, or their connection to the business is the fear. We got to regulate. Like that's their function with the business. So I think we've always been talking about, okay, what is the value and so forth of governance and how we're producing value. I think that's where the negotiator comes in, but there needs to be somebody who's really that orchestrator on that, and that's a strategy. And I think that's like a true CDO, a true kind of director of data governance organization would be that data director who understands how to connect these two things and understands why we can probably take less risk and do more of the negotiator, because how that can actually drive more business and so forth. I'm rambling now because I'm thinking about these three things and I really like them. I really like this perspective.
Yeah,
but bringing in that director role, that really is a strategic role, as you said. I think that's the important part to understand, that data governance is not just something that is connected to the operational part, as you said, the auditing part, the accountability part, but it's something that is also very much part of the planning, what we are doing, and the strategic aspects of it.
So these roles, I think, are really interesting lenses on this. And I want to go back to the beginning of this conversation where you had mentioned about how, governance needs to be able to take a distributed approach. And, I think when today people think about scaling governance, they think about roles like a data steward or a data owner and things like that. So I'm curious about, how do you compare sort of these different hats that the governance team is wearing to some of these roles that we've heard before, like data owners and data stewards and data custodians, and what does it mean to do this in a distributed way?
This is kind of one of the things that I'm trying to explore further, because federation is a principle that really brings some scalability to the work you can do, right? And it's also something that can cascade your data governance to the entire organization. So there's a lot of really beneficial parts to federation, but it gets tricky once you think of, so who's going to do the work, and how are the roles connected, right? And I think that the entire discussion about roles and responsibilities is a discussion you take quite early when you start with data governance. And I don't think that's the right approach. I think we should not think about roles and people. I think we could even do data governance entirely without data governance teams if you are able to implement that mindset. That's a tough one, I know.
Wait, hold on. Let's break this one up. You just said we can do data governance without data governance teams. Okay, how would this look like? I think people listening right now, they're like, "What do you mean? Like, I don't need to have my job shouldn't exist or something?" So,
as long as somebody's doing what governance teams should do, right?
Right, exactly. And I don't know if you read Jesse Anderson's book on data teams, which is a fantastic book. And I read it, and I kind of disagreed on the entire book after I read it, because he says there are only 3 teams that you need. You need a data scientist, you need data engineers, and you need data operations. And I was like, so where's governance? Where are the architects? And it's like, they're there. They have to be there. They have to be part of all that. But they shouldn't be a known group, because this should be something that is an integral part of your data work, from planning to implementation to operation. And so I've been going with that thought for a year now, trying to wrap my head around it. And I think he's right. I think that the entire, so what we are doing in data governance and what we're doing in data architecture, for example, is kind of structural thinking, right? How can the different components interact correctly? And if you think of the governance part, it's about, right, that downwards pressure from regulations, that upwards pressure from business. How can we navigate that, right? Negotiate between that. And I had a presentation last year, and that was the first time I proposed, well, why do we actually need governance people? We need a governance way of thinking, a governance mindset, but wouldn't it be much more beneficial if everyone in your data engineering team, everyone in your data operations team, everyone in your data science team has kind of the same background? And I always use that example because I'm working in oil and gas. And or energy, that's what it's called now. And if you are in a meeting room, there's like a big sign in every meeting room about safety, right? HSE, safety. Every meeting room has it. Almost every company I worked for had a session on safety in their meetings, like a safety moment in the beginning of their meetings. And I've been thinking about, what does it take to get governance on like a sign in every meeting room that this is just like a basic way of thinking, a mindset that you bear with you?
Okay, you are. Yeah, you're making a fantastic point in something that I'm realizing myself, because I've been in scenarios. I've worked also with energy companies. I remember when you walk down the stairs, you always need to have 3 points, and you always hold the handrails, right? And I remember, so nobody's walking in the middle. Like, and I'm in the gigantic campus I'm with Exxon and these companies I worked before, right? And I'm like, and I was just walking around in the middle, and immediately every person, my host is like, no, you have to hold your hand. There's security. Like, it was just a normal thing for everybody. So it's really ground. It's both. It's bottoms up and a top down approach. It just becomes part of your DNA. That's a fantastic way of thinking about this. I like the analogy. Imagine if every single room had like just reminder your governance, but it's something that it's not like a stick thing, right? It's like, yeah, it's the way how we do things. It's the way how we do things. It's just embedded in our culture.
The analogy that I think about here, I'm curious, Winfried, if this resonates with you, is in a lot of software engineering teams, there was a period where everyone would hire like QA people, right? And you'd have like dedicated QA, right? Or a little bit more recently, like cloud DevOps people, and you had DevOps engineers, right? But more and more, the trend is that you don't hire a QA person to test the software. You might have a QA leader who is creating systems and processes and policies, but it's the engineers who need to ensure quality, right? Similarly, right, with DevOps, right? You don't have dedicated DevOps people, right? The engineers all know how to use the cloud and deploy to the cloud, right? So, the word I think of is embedded, right? Is this like embedded governance?
No, exactly. And there's another thought that led me to that conclusion, and that is that I've worked on several data governance teams throughout my career, and there is always a tendency towards excellence in those teams, especially on the centralized teams. Years back, we talked about the center of excellence kind of way of thinking, and then we also talked about that this is counterproductive, because you have people that are in like this excellence setting, but they don't share their excellence, right? You don't have that enablement factor, which is the other thought behind. So why should we have those teams in the first place if they're just accumulating knowledge internally? How can you make those teams more tangible, actionable? Has been kind of a way of thinking for me through the last years, and then I thought, well, maybe the way to go is to not have those teams in the first place.
Well, so a couple questions. I'm going to just throw this out there so you can continue. So one is, for the folks who are listening right now, who are working data governance, they have a title of data governance and data stewards, or they're the directors of data governance. Like, what is your message to them based on kind of this vision that you have? Is saying, look, like that, you're per your vision, your job, your role, that should not exist. It should be it. So what is your message to them? That's one. And then another topic that comes to mind is, like, if you are embedding all of this to the data science team, data engineering team, so forth, that truly means that a lot of the governance needs to be automated. So what are then the easiest parts of governance to automate? And what are the ones that are the hardest to automate, where you say, look, these tasks, whatever, they should just be a click of a button, it's done. And that's why and that's actually kind of the a reasoning to support your position of how this should be embedded. But what are the parts that you say, I don't know, like, this is too hard? Like, maybe there is probably a need for a role to have that to somebody. I don't know. I'll let you go.
I think, yeah, to the first part of your question, I think the people that are working in data governance today are, in my mind, pioneers, right? These are the guys that have the knowledge, that have the right mindset, and I think it's their responsibility to share that. And that is that entire enablement way of thinking, right? How do I make others better? And I had a podcast episode earlier where I described it as PT, like a personal trainer. So data governance people in organizations today, they are personal trainers for the rest of the data organization, right? And that means that you know how to do the exercises correctly, but you have to share that. You don't do them for your own benefit, right? You do them for everyone else's benefit.
I have, to be honest, I didn't know what your answer was going to be, and I had some ideas of what you could be saying. Did not think at all that that's what you would be saying, and this is a fantastic way of thinking about that. And I love how you said, yeah, they're pioneers, which is true, right? Oh, like you're the first ones doing this. It's time to go share that knowledge with everybody else if we truly want to have a culture where that governance is embedded. All right. And then, so to my other question about what is the easiest things to automate? What are the hardest things to automate?
Well, we talked about policy and policy enforcement, right? How do you operationalize your policies? How do you can enforce them across your systems? I think that's the point where most organizations are working on. And I think Tim, we had this discussion about data contracts, and I think there is maybe an application for smart contracts there as well to automate some of that and to ensure the accountability throughout. Another thing is compliance. I think understanding changes in your regulatory landscape through natural language processing, trying to read through changes in laws. For example, I've had a conversation on my podcast about someone who just built an RPA to do that. So every time there's a law change in Norway, everyone in the company gets a little pling and they get an understanding of what changed and how does it impact our policies. So these are things I think are quite on the first automation step. And then there's something about the monitoring part. And I think we've been talking about data observability. We've been talking about monitoring for a while. There is definitely a chance to automate, and to automate also on the audit part, I think. And then there's the other part that we talked about, data director, negotiation, where I think it's harder and maybe shouldn't be automated at all.
Like your perspective on that. There's aspects of this which are more strategic, right? And maybe AI and things can assist you in analyzing the inputs and making better plans, but ultimately it's always a more human decision.
Now,
Oh, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, like, it is yeah. What you've said, so I see it as a three waves, and I think in a way you're providing kind of the guide if you're just starting governance and organization, what you should be doing, right? So you should first kind of the automations and compliance, if that's kind of policies and compliance, able to go do that stuff and automate that stuff. Second, after that, focus on monitoring and making sure that things that are now working continues to keep working and so forth. So those are the things that we should be doing today, and there are tools and approaches to be able to go automate that stuff. You're kind of not saying anything. You're stating the obvious, but I like to remind ourselves that sometimes we need to repeat the obvious because we're not doing the obvious gets lost sometimes with so much complexity of things. And then once you kind of have the obvious done, it's like, oh, let's go do the next great thing and automate that. And your point is like, yeah, let's go do the next great thing, but that next great thing probably won't be automated. And now once you automate all the obvious stuff, now you can actually spend your time doing these other things that can figure out the strategy about how you're balancing what needs to be audited versus how you got to negotiate things and so forth. So that's how I'm interpreting this. I really like this approach. Tim, I cut you off.
Oh no, you're good. You're good. Well, one thing I want to unpack a little bit, Winfried, if you're game here, is I want to get a little bit more into the technology. Um, One thing I see in the space, I'm sure Winfried, you probably see the same, that makes me a little worried is in order to really automate governance in kind of the best of breed way that you can do today, you end up having to combine together quite a few tools. Right? You need data observability, you need data catalog, you need workflow, you need data scanning and classification. You need I'm probably missing 3 or 4. Access policy enforcement. You probably never need to actually deeply integrate into several of the cloud tools themselves in order to really do things properly. What is your what do you think about the technology landscape, and do you see that some tools are more critical than others? What's your kind of technology take on all this?
I think, and this is probably the reason why we are talking so much about governance lately. That's the tooling landscape that has really evolved throughout the last years. And I think data catalogs were the first step there, right? To really launch something that, on the data governance side, we can do something on technology as well. I've had this article out a while back where I said that old school data governance, so before catalog, was very much doing the right thing the wrong way because we didn't have the possibilities to do it any other way. And then we move into 2024, 2025, where we have a lot of tools on the market, and you now have the possibility to do things the right way, but you're kind of focusing on the wrong stuff because you're focusing solemnly on that enforcement part and not on the other parts that we just discussed, right? I've had this one thing I've been thinking about for a while, and it is so if you think of IT governance, right? The point of IT governance is to align your system landscape with your business strategy or the goal for your business, right? But IT very much, no matter how you look at it, comprises of systems, right? Physical, the virtual, and they all are dedicated to achieve like some kind of specific task. And we did take the same mindset and put it into data governance and said, well, it's a set of systems, and you can have a set of technology, and everyone is dedicated to a certain task. And it gets complicated because it's not the same, because data is not really limited to systems as long as you don't limit it to systems, right? So I'm trying to keep a bit of distance to the entire technology discussion, and trying to look at data as like a holistic thing rather. Make sense?
That's an interesting insight right there. Is like, if you look at the IT perspective, you have the boundaries of these systems are well defined, and but then when you look at data, the data doesn't have data doesn't have a boundary. Data will flow across all these different things. So then it goes back to like, is it one side, the other side? And then that's why also you think about it, these tools, all the tools that Tim was describing, like they all have overlaps, right? There's like, even the tools themselves don't have very specific boundaries. And I mean, every tool, almost every data tool now has some catalog in there, right? And I'm like, and then people, so that just makes that makes the conversation even more complicated. So that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, years back I worked as a consultant, and I came into a company and they bought a application on back of a quote, and they were like, now we have an application here and we don't know what to do with it. Can you just come in and figure out how we can use it? And it's like, this is the wrong way around. You should have a need defined before you go out and shop your application, right?
That's again, stating the obvious. We have to say it over and over again. What is a problem that you're solving? not like here's this cool tech and how can we use this cool tech. I mean, yeah, we should experiment with something, but that should not be taking up all the air in the room. Tim, any final, pass the final word to you before we go to lightning round?
No, I think we hit a lot of great topics, and my mind is going in a lot of directions. I feel like we could talk for another couple hours on this, but Winfried, I think we did a great job exploring a little bit around what does it mean to do distributed automated governance, maybe in a little bit of a better way.
So let's kick it off with a lightning round, and I'll do the first one. So companies that are trying to establish their governance functions right now, should they start off doing this embedded approach to governance we're talking about?
I think they should, yeah. And I think they should definitely look into federation as a concept. Well, depending on the size of the company, right? A startup with 5 people, you don't want to federate. But if you are a big global organization, that should be one of your thoughts. And it doesn't mean that once you're trying to implement federated computational governance, that you are going for a data mesh, right?
Yeah, you don't have to do a full data mesh approach to take advantage of federated or distributed data governance. That's a good point. All right, second question. Is it possible to achieve strong governance while allowing data teams to have autonomy?
Yes. I think even your governance is going to be stronger because it's much more connected to your business.
I like that.
So one topic we didn't get, I'm actually surprised and in a way happily surprised that we didn't talk about generative AI and LLMs, all this stuff. But now I'm going to bring it up. So is the rise of generative AI changing the goals of governance?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I don't think it should change the goals. I think it changes the methodology and technology that we could use to implement governance, but it shouldn't change our goals.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. All right, last question. Will organizations be able to automate governance in, let's say, the next 5 years, or do you think our journey will take longer than that?
I think, well, depends on where you put your end goal on the journey. There's definitely a lot of parts of governance that you could automate. And I think, well, we had this discussion, we didn't have this discussion, but I think these parts are very much about data management, about managing your data, about enforcing governance rules, about operationalizing. There, I see definitely a lot of things happening in the next 5 years.
All right. Well, Tim, time for takeaways. Take us away with takeaways. We got so much.
Well, Winfried, great discussion. I think we really started off with talking about how you said we're at a point in time where we can do data governance differently than we've done before. We have new things around AI, around automation, around technology. And, you didn't say it directly, but I think you very much implied it throughout the entire conversations that we also have better models by which to describe these sort of distributed and scaled teams and processes, things like data mesh, although data mesh doesn't have to be the focus, right? But things like that. And have we automated enough as an industry within our companies? No. There's a lot that we can explore there, and there's a lot that's unexplored. There's plenty of new fronts that we're going to find out, right? And you said that there are 3 main events that have really shaped governance. First was regulatory requirements. That really was a huge driver, and the need to be able to manage and meet those regulatory requirements. 2 is the push around enablement, right? Other words, democratization, data literacy, data empowerment, right? That's obviously been a very big push, and governance has been at the forefront of that. How can they be the enabler, not just the police? And then 3rd is around automation. You didn't mention AI explicitly, but obviously that's one, factor in what can maybe be driving more automation. Data governance can be a driver of automation in a complex and distributed landscape, helping to align on standards and policies. So I think that was a very good way to think about the evolution of how governance as a function is evolving, right? You said that the definition of data governance that you like, right? That you really think about. Obviously, you can look at the Dhamma definition and things like that. I do recommend that for any data professional, get the Dhamma Dambak book. There's a couple other Dhamma publications that are very helpful. It's a great reference. But I like your definition a lot, where you said data governance is a human-based system by which data assets in a socio-technical system are directed, overseen, and by which organizations are held accountable for achieving their defined purpose. And so I think you really focused on some key words there, right? The human-based system, socio-technical system. You mentioned the three words, right? Directed, overseen, and accountable. And you talked about these three kind of roles or hats that need to be fulfilled within the organization. The data negotiator, which is working between different internal and external forces. You've got the data director that's really shaping the focus. It's more strategic. And then you've got the data auditor, which is accountable for, really helping for the accountability around the defined purpose, ensuring that it happens and is executed. Finally, before I pass it to you, Juan, I think you started to explore where's the line between data management and data governance. And where is the scope, right, versus kind of like human to machine to human. Obviously there's lots of dynamics there. Humans ultimately are accountable, but the more and more we're trying to lean on our machines and systems and automations to be able to take what we want to have happen in the organization and make it scalable. All right, Juan, what about you? What were your big takeaways?
So we ended up talking about the whole distributed approach, and I think the big shocker here is that we can do data governance without data governance teams. And you called out Jesse Anderson's book, which is a reminder we need to have him on the podcast. On his book on data teams, where he brings up three teams, right? Data science, data engineering, data ops. And you're saying you at the beginning is like, what do you mean only those three teams? Like, where are the governance people? Where are the architects? But after thinking about it, you've come around and you realize we need a governance way of thinking and mindset. And wouldn't it be better if everyone on those three teams had that background and did the governance? And the analogy was energy companies. You go walk into any room, everybody, there's signs about safety. It's embedded in their culture. I was talking about that if you're walking down the stairs, you have to grab the handrail. That's something everybody does. So in a way, you think about it, Tim brought this up, the concept of it's like embedded governance. And that's maybe the way about thinking around this. Which begs the question, what about the people who are doing data governance today? And I really appreciate how you brought how you stated, they are the pioneers. And things evolve and they have the right mindset, and it's their responsibility now to share that way of thinking with others. How they can make others do better their work with this mindset. And your analogy, they're like personal trainers, right? They want to be the personal trainers for the rest of the organization. They know how to go use exercises and teach people how to go do them. We also dive into what the automation part, and I see this as there's these three waves of tasks that should be that when it comes to automation. The first waves of tasks are the operational and enforcing of policies, right? Data contracts even help around here. The compliance around that stuff. The second wave is monitoring, right? Once you got things working, let's keep monitoring and making sure things are keep working. This is where data observability and stuff comes in. And then that third wave is when you talk about those three kind of roles of the data negotiator, right? The ones who kind of are working between all the internal, external forces and figure out how we can move the business forward. The auditor, which are the ones who are thinking about the compliance. And you have that data director, which is overseeing and tying that with the strategy of the business. And that part may not need to be automated. And I think if you do automate those first two waves, you actually have the time to be able to go do that type of work, which again, it's embedded, right? Everybody else is doing that. And then kind of wrapped up with technology. There's so many tools around this to help automate the governance. I like your approach is that the old school way, we were doing the right things the wrong way. And now that we have so much tools that we have the possibility to do things the right way, but we sometimes focus doing the wrong stuff, which is sometimes focusing too much on the compliance and things. So I think that was a fantastic way of thinking about the situation. Whew. How did we do? Anything we missed?
Wow. Yeah, that was comprehensive. Thanks. No, I don't think you missed anything.
Oh, that again, as we say, that was all you. We were just paying attention to what you were saying. So thank you. To wrap up our three final questions, what's your advice about data, about life? Who should we invite next? And what resources do you follow?
Oh, these are good ones. Advice on life. Well, I think maybe own it. right? That goes for data as well as it goes for life, right? You are the captain of your own life, right? So take responsibility for it, as much as you take responsibility for your data. And I read this all the time in data governance, that we assign ownership. You can't assign ownership. Ownership is something you take. So own it. Maybe that's the advice.
I love that. Yes, data ownership isn't something that is assigned. It's something you take. Who should we invite next?
Oh, we talked about Jesse Anderson. I think he would be a fantastic candidate for the podcast.
Yeah, I'll probably have to say apologies, Jesse, because I can't believe we've chatted so many times, but I can't believe we haven't told them. So sorry, Jesse. We'll reach out. We'll definitely want to have you on this. And finally, what resources do you follow?
Well, I have my own the Metadata podcast, so I can definitely recommend that.
Definitely.
And one thing that there's an app out there that gives you like 15-minute summaries of books, and I love that one. Called Blinkist.
Is that Blinkist?
Blinkist, yeah.
Mm.
So you get like a 15-minute summary of a book, and if you're interested, you can read it afterwards. It's fantastic.
Oh,
yeah. My wife loves Blinkist. She's listening to it all the time. I think I have a family subscription. I should actually use it.
all right. Well, Winfried, thank you so much. I really appreciate you bringing us very different perspectives, and you got me thinking about stuff for sure. And I know people are listening; they are going to be questioning what they're doing in a very positive and kind of how do we evolve this so we can all be better. So I really thank you for these honest, no BS conversation. Cheers.
Cheers. Fantastic.